But to start off this afternoon's part of the PFAL programme, we'd like to introduce our second speaker, Dr. Loreto Aliaga-Salas. Dr. Loreto Salas is currently a research fellow at Leeds University. She also has a wealth of teaching experience gained in both the UK and Chile, and she has a special interest in the education and development of language teachers. So over to Dr. Loreto Salas.
To be part of this session. In this session, I'm going to be drawing on my PhD research, which I finished now 2 years ago, which is based on curriculum change in the context of English language teacher education. So in today's session, I'm going to be talking about the context where I based my research, which is in Chile. And then I'm going to be zooming into my case study, which is called the integrated curriculum. And then my particular point of view, it will be on a student's teacher's voice on the integrated curriculum. Looking into the context, when we think about Chile, I've been in the UK for 6 years, and I have had to explain what Chile is many times. And it's a country that's very, very far away from the rest of the world, actually. I'm currently in Chile at the minute for family reasons, and it took me 25 hours door to door from Leeds to get to the capital, to Santiago. It's a country that is, and as a result of being so far away from everything, being on the Pacific side, it's isolated from any English-speaking context at all. So we're surrounded by by Spanish-speaking countries, which you may know, from Mexico pretty much all the way down to the end of the continent is Spanish, with the exception of Brazil. And that is one of the reasons also why proficiency level is also not very high, which I'm going to be drawing on in a minute. My case study, my PhD title was Teachers Education Cognition during the implementation of an innovative pre-service English teaching program in Chile. And when we look at teacher educators cognition, we understand it as what teachers think, know, and believe, and how that impacts their classroom practices. And that's according to Simon Borg. So it's really important to understand this when we're trying to talk about curriculum change or change in general. Because when we think of this, teachers in any context, in any sort of reform context, if teachers disagree with change, things won't change at all. So that is something really important to consider in this when we're talking about change. And this is what we're just mentioning. So the heart of curriculum change implies having thousands and thousands of teachers who are making things differently. So it requires all the actors that are involved in educational change. We're talking about ministry of education, we're talking about local education authorities, we're talking about every single school headmistress, to be actually working all together to be able to work toward change. If any of these factors is not basically working together, change does not actually take place, or it's not successful, or it's less successful than you would expect. So that's why when we're talking about trying to change the system, it's really complex, particularly when it's at the national level. But also, in a smaller scale level, it's also a challenge. So bearing this in mind, when we talk about change and people's beliefs, I'm going to be focusing on the big picture in the Chilean context, in the Chilean language education context. The national teaching standard expects teachers to have a C1 proficiency, so being advanced users of the language to be able to teach it. However, according to the latest research that the Ministry of Education has done, which are now almost 5 years old, only 30% of the Chilean teachers that are actually working in the school classroom has that proficiency. Only 30% of teachers have the C1 expected level. And also there is another reason which is affecting what is happening in the context. Chile has the sad record of being the most unequal country in the world according to the OECD. That's not really something to be proud of, and that shows into educational inequality. And the poorest sectors, or the least, the students that have within who are within the poorest sectors, only 1.5% of them have reached the B1 expected proficiency level that they are when they finish school after 8 years of English, which is part of the national curriculum. Only 1%, 1.5% of them have reached that B1 proficiency level, whereas the highest income groups, over 80% have reached it. So this is what the big gap is between the poor and the rich, and basically agrees with what the OECD tell us about inequality. And that is something to bear in mind in terms of language teacher education. So in order to become a teacher of English in the country, anywhere, in any university, you have to start studying. You go into a 5-year teacher education program, 4 to 5 years average. And the universities don't ask you, it's not a requirement to know any English. So you can literally have a A1 level and start becoming a teacher of English. So it's not only trying to learn English, trying to learn how to teach English, but it's also about trying to or knowing how to teach it. So it's learning the language at the same time and education on the other hand. So both things. So I'm focusing on one particular program, which is called the integrated curriculum. This is my case study. This curriculum was implemented in 2011, but during 2010, it was the process of curriculum design. And in this process, all the teaching staff, all the curriculum staff, all the teacher educators, all the student teachers from all cohorts, alumni and employees got involved. So it was a highly participative program, which what the literature shows, when there is a bottom-up design, it should be successful. And as a result, it's very different from other pre-service teacher programs in the country, because it was on the one hand, it was a very different participative design, but also in the way that it's understanding the way to teach or to train, educate future teachers of English. It has 4 curricular strands. On the one hand, it's got the integrated English language. Then it has teaching methodologies, so what you need to learn how to teach the 4 skills, how to teach young learners, how to teach secondary students as well, an assessment. And you have subjects in education and psychology, so you have history education, you have sociology, you have a subject in relation to reflective practices, and then you have 6 semesters when you start going into schools. So you start observing classrooms, and then you become a teacher assistant, and then you take over the whole process of teaching when you're doing your final practicum, when you're in your 5th year. And the curriculum has a clear curriculum outcome, what they call the exit profile. And this exit profile, so when the students graduate, they want, this program aims at the students and the future teachers to be critical teachers who through language teaching will promote social change and reduce inequality. So the fact of wanting to do something different, so being these teachers who are going to be agents of change and going to be able to make a difference into their students' lives and reduce inequality through language teachers, and making people to think and to reflect in the classrooms. And this is highly inspired by Freire. You may know Paulo Freire, who was a Brazilian educator and promoted emancipatory education in the sense of making people to understand reality and becoming an object of transformation. So where everyone, both teachers and learners, teachers and students, are actors, highly active actors in the process of changing the world. And Freire and Henry Giroux as well, highly influential in everything that this curriculum promotes. So this is highly influenced by critical pedagogy. As I mentioned earlier, this curriculum is structured into 4 curriculum strands. So we have, as I mentioned earlier, and every single strand needs to feed into the exit profile. So everyone needs to respond through the practice, or every teacher educator should respond through the practice to achieving the exit profile. However, my focus is on the integrated English language strand because it concentrates over 60% of the teaching hours. As I mentioned earlier, students come with no background in English, so they have to learn the language at the same time of learning how to teach it. More teacher educators work in this strand, so therefore more problems have emerged on this particular strand. And the fact that it's called integrated curriculum as a whole is that means that every single strand draws on and fits into each other. So things that I'm learning in integrated English language will also merge methodology and vice versa. So for instance, when I'm learning English, I'm going to be reading things on linguistics, or I'm going to be reading things on sociology, etc. So that's basically what we understand by integrated. So there's a lot of work of coordination between every single strand in order to become integrated, and therefore there are more challenges that have emerged. My research has been inspired by 4 research questions, but for the purpose of this presentation, I'm focusing on my 3rd research question that looks into teachers and students. So the research question reads, what impact has teacher education experience had on the planning and implementation processes and a students' teachers' understanding of the integrated curriculum? As I mentioned earlier, teacher educators, so it's about sustained practices in order to reach change. And student teachers, as they receive this curriculum, but they're also going to enable the curriculum. They're going to enact the curriculum once they graduate into the classroom, into the school classroom. For this purpose, I had 28 student teachers who participated in this research from all different cohorts, and I interviewed them extensively online, face-to-face, and also had some email interviews. I had a really complicated data collection process, so I had to adapt my data collection through different strategies to do this. So once I collected all the data, I processed it, I transcribed every single interview, and then I used NVivo in order to find the different themes that were emerging. And these themes are looking into the macro perspectives of the integrated curriculum and the exit profile. Then there's a focus on the integrated English language strand. And then there are some suggestions for improvement. And this is what I'm going to be mentioning now. When we look at the students' data, I have left it as it was. The interviews, even though we both the students and myself speak Spanish, we decided to do the interviews in English. I gave the students the option to speak Spanish or speak English, and most of them, exception 1, I think, decided to speak in Spanish. But everyone else was the interviews in English. So I have left the quotations I'm going to show as they were, so they reflect the current proficiency level of these particular students, in case it's not me making grammar mistakes, if it makes sense. When we look at so I asked students what they understood by the integrated curriculum. to define the integrated curriculum for me. So we got our first year students that understood the integrated curriculum by practicing everything together, thinking that the particular integrated language strand has a combination of CLIL, of lexical grammar, and task-based learning. So there isn't a particular lecture on or a module on phonetics or on grammar or vocabularies or like systemic knowledge as such, but everything's taught together. So that's why when we asked a first year student, she sees the integrated curriculum as something that basically blends everything together. Whereas when we get to a fourth year student, has a broader perspective, a more comprehensive perspective. So he looks at the first area of having the four skills being taught, the integration of different topics, as I mentioned earlier. So you can talk about sociology, you can talk about linguistics, about psychology, about everything. So it's not only learning language, but you learn through language. And then he focuses on the other classes, on the other modules that relate to English. So for instance, he mentions here the integration of linguistics and the integrated language strand. So you see that as they progress through the curriculum, they see that there is an integration between the different strands. Also, but not everyone considers that appropriately. So you've got a second year student that says, you know what, I come from school that didn't teach me English, and then I'm expected to teach English. I mean, I expect teachers here, teacher educators, to teach me English, but in the way they do it, I want to learn grammar, I want to learn phonetics, but I'm not being given that. So there is this conflict of between what they are being taught and their beliefs and what is actually being given by the curriculum. So there is a lot of conflict between students' beliefs or how to be taught English and what they are being given, because it's about reading and discussions. Also, when talking about the exit profile, there are very interesting perspectives. So we get to students to understand, again, as fourth year students, understands about the fact of being an agent of change, or being somebody that is going to be critical and is actually going to make a difference by doing things in the classroom and becoming that person that is going to be somebody that is making an impact on their students or future students' life in the classroom. But not everyone agrees with that. And we got a second year student that says, you know what, we've heard a lot of the teachers talking about this. They know they want to be different, this curriculum is different, we want to be different teachers of English, but you know what? The system doesn't really want this. There is a struggle, they see a conflict between their experiences as students at the school context and also what the university sees. So they have all this backpack of beliefs of being a teacher that is probably lecturing at school context, going to be lecturing, just transmitting knowledge and teaching grammar. So they see that this is conflict. How am I going to apply what I've been learning here at the university in the school system, where the school system wants me to teach grammar? You see, going back to what we were talking about earlier about making systemic change. When you get you need thousands and thousands of teachers to make a difference. Looking into the integrated English language strands, there are very conflicted views. So we got students that agree with the program and being having of learning language like unconsciously, but at the same time, the fact that you're there, you learn it. So see, like I remember when I interviewed Hector, he was saying something like, if you ask me how I learned English, I don't know, because I was never taught it. It was unconscious. You're there, but you're doing nothing. So that is very, very interesting in the way that he conceives his own learning process. Like when he's trying to put it into words, he's not able to do so because it happened to be there, because I was in the classroom, I happened to learn it. And very similar to what Valentina points out as a fourth year student as well. She says, what is the purpose of this? We have learned so many things, And it's been there was like with potpourri of topics and readings and things we've done, we can't, she says that they can't, students can't really see what the purpose or what the direction of this module is because it's been really random. And Pamela points out about the text. So they have to read extensive text per class. They were reading, when I did my data collection, students had to read about 30, between 15 to 30 pages per class. In the lower levels, they had 5 days a week. So every single day of the week they have English. So imagine that means reading about 150 pages per week. And as they progress, they have 3 days a week of English language, and then this repetitive, and therefore this affected the way that they were learning in terms of they lost motivation. I remember there was another student that said that the class had lost their lives. They needed to become alive, and they went. When I asked students about the participation, the fact that they could have a say in terms of the design, they draw on critical pedagogy about the democracy that they had on the program, the way that the students were heard. And this is from a fifth-year students when they had the opportunity to learn and to decide what they were doing, going to suggest, what decide had a say in terms of topics that they could say, and give also suggestions also in the kinds of assessments. It was which very disruptive. I mean, different from, not disruptive, but different from other programs. I know I was never asked what kind of assessment I wanted to do. But a second-year student, on the other hand, says, you know what, we don't really know. We're only students. It's the teachers who need to make the decision. And the students have been asked a lot of, by the fact that they suggest two topics, they give too much power. So basically, they that as everyone wants to tailor the context to what they want, there are some conflicts in that way, because sometimes the students said that the way that the lectures were structured weren't the way that they had suggested to do so. So there are some conflicts in that sense. Oops. Therefore, I asked the students, if you had all the power of the world, what would you make different? What would you change? And the students mentioned something the same about, for instance, on content integrated within the strands. They said, for instance, on the topics of identity, that was a topic that was mentioned repetitively many times. And they said, they're repeating too many topics because we're studying identity on module A, module B, module C. It's a bit too much. We're repeating the content. There's a content overlap and the students don't value that much. Another suggestion comes from a second-year student in relation to proficiency level. As it's a very demanding program. They want everyone to have some sort of language support to be able to reach a minimum standard in order to be able to face the curriculum and to do well. Another suggestion comes from a fourth-year student who is already going to the schools, and she sees that not knowing systemic knowledge, in this case grammar, is becoming an issue when she's at the school context. She says that the fact that she doesn't really know much grammar, and the school is asking them to know grammar, the school where she's at, and she's felt that she doesn't know what the students are asking her, has become an issue. And the things that obviously you learn at school is very different to what you should learn as a teacher of English. It's about language knowledge, and this is about, I'm thinking of the work of Donald Freeman in terms of what we teachers need to know, and it's knowing about the language, knowing the subject, and knowing about the subject. And that is a difference that it's important to draw. And most importantly, knowing the subject, knowing about the subject, but knowing how to teach it as well. And that's basically the work of Donna Freeman. So in order to start wrapping up, I'd like to make a couple of points. So definitely, as I mentioned at the beginning, the voices of teachers and students, not only in language teacher education, but in any sort of curriculum innovation process are critical, because they are the ones who implement and they are the ones who receive innovation. So knowing what they think, knowing what they believe, and knowing how the process is going from their perspective is critical for curriculum change success. The students, however, have a very, very narrow perspective into curriculum, because as they spent most of the time from all of these 5 years knowing and learning English, they think of the integrated curriculum from the perspective of integrated language strand. And in the challenges that they mention is in relation to the to the strand, to the development of proficiency and knowledge, and also the connection with reality in terms of what the schools are expecting. And this, even though it doesn't come from a student quote, but it comes from one of the teacher educators, I think for me, I think it's the most powerful quote from my interviews from the teachers. And this comes from David, who's one of the teachers, who says some of the challenge might be that our students don't know how to teach in school because we're training them not to teach in school the ways of teaching. So the conflict again that the program wants the students to do differently, and they feel, the students as a result feel conflicted in what the students say. And the Michael Fullen, from drawing on the work of Frank Freeman, has this quote I think is spectacular and summarizes everything what in terms of what educational change looks for. It's all on teachers, is what on teachers do and think. It's as simple and complex as that. So if teachers don't agree, they won't do. And they basically can say, cannot, can I say, they can show, they can appear to agree on a decision, but at the end of the day, they may not agree. They close the classroom door and they carry on doing whatever they were doing. Why bother? Why do we need to do things differently if everything we've been doing is fine? So looking into a process of curriculum innovation, when you have three stages, or an initial idea when you start design, and then you start implementing it, and then your curriculum start making changes, and you reach an institutionalization stage. When we look at the curriculum implementation as it stands in my case study, and it's transiting to an institutionalization stage. But when you have so many different actors, and here my focus is on the implementers, so the teacher educators and the receivers and future enablers of the curriculum, knowing what they think and going into that classroom with 45 children, that is the standard in a classroom, knowing what they know, what they understand, and having their views on how things are going are critical for this curriculum to be successful. Because if these teachers are full of energy, full of ideas of becoming an agent of change, they need to know how to find their way to make a slight difference, a minimal difference, a baby steps difference in the classroom, and trying to fight the system in some way to make small changes, sustained and small changes in order to make such a change successful. And with that, I would like to finish. And thank you very much again for listening to me while online. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Aliaga-Salas. It's been a unique experience for me anyway, having a live lecture, live streamed. And we thank you once again for sharing your views and thoughts with us today.
45 kids in a class, how do the teachers deal with that?
How do you, yeah, having 45 children in classes is actually a challenge. And I remember when I trained to become a teacher, one of the modules that we had was on classroom management. It's challenging, but it's part of the things that you learn when you do teaching methodology. You learn strategies how to deal with large classrooms. So those are strategies of grouping. The problem is basically the strategies that you learn is on grouping and discipline, classroom management control. So there's a lot of discipline control that you have to learn. And that is part of what you learn. There are challenges, obviously, that I think that the drawback on having so many children in the classrooms that you cannot really monitor everyone's progress, and you have to do a lesson that is going like a one-size-fits-all lesson in English, and that is the most challenging thing. So I remember when I trained and when I teach methodologies, basically to identify techniques to cater for those students who have a high proficiency level and they get bored more obviously quicker than the ones that are struggling to move forward. So there are different strategies that you have to apply in order to deal with a large classroom. And there is extensive research. I mean, I've been reading a lot the work of, for instance, Richard Smith and Harry Kuchar on the work on teaching English in difficult circumstances. So they have published extensively on teaching English in difficult circumstances. And large classrooms is definitely a difficult circumstance. Thank you. No more questions. Thank you very much for having invited me. I really enjoyed it, and I'm hoping to stay in touch. Please feel free to send me a message in case you want to stay in touch. Thank you very much.